I can kind of get by. You're living in constant fear that you're going to lose that place and there's nowhere else to go. So there's all these worries, all these fears, and what makes it even worse is we've got the chaos coming from Donald Trump and the uncertainty that that presents. That what does that mean for my life? What does that mean for my job? How is the trade war going to impact my potential ability to get a job? And what's that going to mean for the cost of living that's already so high? And since I pay so much for my rent, I got so little left over, I'm not going to be able to handle if prices get even higher. There's not much left over. People are talking about how much their rent is costing them, how it takes up sometimes more than half of their income that they're bringing in. And that is wrong. People should be able to have a good place, a decent place that allows them with enough money left over for them to save up, for them to pay the bills, for them to build for the future. And people are like, I can't even think about the future. I'm so caught up in the struggles of right now. And that's something I want to change. And we've heard recently Mark Carney talk about it's going to be difficult times ahead. But in Mark Carney's viewpoint, when he talks about difficult times ahead, who is he talking about? Because I know he's not talking about difficult times for those at the top. He's not talking about difficult times for corporate landlords. He's talking about difficult times for you. He's saying that people, everyday folks, got to tighten their belts, but that those at the top don't have to do anything. I think that is a wrong approach. In this time, the role of government should be to say no. You know, when this storm is hitting us, the storm that Donald Trump represents, these difficult times, government should step up and say, you know what, it's not going to be on the backs of everyday folks. It's not going to be the backs of these young people. We're not going to let that happen. And so I think that it's clear that he's not going to be the person that's going to stop big landlords that are exploiting you. He's not going to be the one that's going to stop rent evictions or fixed term leases. He actually benefited from the housing crisis just as recently as a couple months ago when he was literally the chair of one of the largest corporate landlords that engaged in rent eviction. He's not going to be the person that's going to stop something that he profited off of. And he's already said his plan. Plan is to cut the services that you need to pay for tax cuts for the millionaires. I think that's wrong. And Pierre Poilievre is certainly not going to be the one to stop corporations from ripping you off. He is also going to let them do whatever they want. So right now, people need some hope. I heard a lot of people talking about losing hope, and I want to give you some hope. Our plan is national rent control. We want to make sure that people actually have protections, that renters are protected. Our plan is to end fixed-term leases. We want to end rent evictions and dem evictions. We want to strengthen tenant unions to be able to negotiate for their tenants with the landlords. We want to end the collusion that's going on, where large corporate landlords are colluding to jack up rent. You'll notice that rents go up across the boards. It's because there's collusion going on. They're jacking up the rents together. And the way we're going to do this is, if any province or municipality wants federal investments, federal funds to build homes, they have to put in place laws that protect renters. We're not going to build affordable homes for those homes to just turn into unaffordable homes because there's no protections in place. If we build a home and there's no rent control and there's affordability there, well, that affordability will evaporate because there's no rent control. If we build a home that's affordable and there's fixed-term leases, and after a year, the tenant, the landlord can just jack up the rent, well, then we've not actually solved the problem. So if you want to get federal funding with New Democrats there, we're going to require that federal funding is tied to laws being passed in municipalities and provinces that protect renters, that end fixed-term leases, that end rent evictions and dem evictions, and that put in place rent control. That's our plan for people. That's our plan to put people first. So in this time, people are feeling really worried. If you're worried about the cuts that feel like they're looming, if you're worried about you being forgotten, vote for a New Democrat. Vote for Lisa Roberts here in Halifax, and you're going to send someone to Ottawa that's going to put you first, not the billionaires, not the corporate landlords, but you and your family. Donc, on sait qu'on est dans un temps difficile. C'est clair.
So we know these times are tough. And I have heard stories from people here. They shared their stories about how desperate they feel, how they have a sense that there are no options for them, no solutions for them. People move into affordable housing, but they're afraid they will lose that housing. People feel they can't think about the future because the present is so difficult. So today I want to give people hope. Often we hear from Mark Carney, for example, the fact that he realizes times are tough for people. But in these tough times, he also talks about the fact that these will be tough times for workers. He never says it'll be tough times for big companies, because in his opinion, the pressure associated with this crisis should be on your shoulders and the shoulders of your families. And I think he's wrong. I don't think that's the right thing to do. And Pierre Poilievre will not address the big problems like rent eviction and the fact that rents are constantly going up. He will not address the large corporate landlords and fix the problem. Now, Mark Carney has taken advantage of that. He will not tell the real estate giants to do something about this. So what is the solution? If you want someone who's on your side and will fight for you, it's the NDP. It's Lisa Roberts here in Halifax and the NDP across the country. So our plan today is controlling rents nationally. We want to put an end to rent evictions. We want to stop the big companies ripping off renters. And we're going to say that in these difficult times, we should be protecting renters. We should stop the large corporate landlords from ripping people off. So we will tie federal funding to provinces and municipalities that introduce laws that protect renters and put an end to this type of practice. For example, constantly increasing rents. We'll put an end to rent evictions, and we can do that. I want to give people hope. You deserve someone who's on your side, who will fight for you, not to defend the profits of millionaires, but who will really focus on your interests and protect your interests every single day. And that's us in the NDP.
On va maintenant passer à la période de questions des journalistes. Une question et une relance par journaliste. We'll now take the questions from the press, one question and one follow-up per journalist. We'll begin with, on va commencer avec Valérie Gamache, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh. Vous me permettez
Hello,
de
Mr. Singh. I'd like to move to a different subject. Now, you have Hélène Brousseau, who will be running for you in Quebec. What does that mean to have her back as a candidate? Well, this is incredible news. As you know, Hélène was a star candidate and a star member of parliament for us. She was my former leader in the House of Commons. She's a woman of great conviction and a passionate person, and she fought to improve employment insurance. She was our critic on agriculture issues. So this is someone who is really incredibly engaged, a great member of the team, but also an incredible member of parliament. So if you live in her riding, I really encourage you to work for us, to vote for a star like her.
Sure, yeah. I should have said off the top that I understand why I totally accept a question on this topic, because it's very important. We're so excited that Ruth Hélène Brousseau is running again. She is absolutely a star. She was a star when she was in the House, and she's going to be a star candidate for us. She was formerly my House leader as well. She's someone that cares deeply about the people she represents. She's a fighter, and her story is one that really impressed a lot of people. Seeing someone start off with a lot of folks that were detractors. People thought that she wasn't going to be a great MP, and she turned out to be an incredible MP and fought so hard for people. And it shows you we actually need MPs who come from all walks of life. And if you give someone like that a shot, look at the great work she can do. So I encourage everybody who lives in the riding to vote for someone like Ruth Hélène Brousseau. She's going to fight for you. She is incredible, and I'm so proud that she's running for us again.
And with this candidacy, I think you now have 340 candidates. You're ahead of the Liberals and Conservatives who had to reject certain candidates. Can you let us know why you didn't have to do that? Well, we're proud of the fact that we had a team that worked very, very hard looking for candidates. And now we have all the candidates we need in this election, and we're proud of that, especially because we did it ahead of the other parties. Now, we don't know what will happen, but I can say that I want to show leadership where I need to make an important decision.
Yes, I've got an incredible team, and folks should always know that anytime I get up here with, imagine, like hundreds of people behind me, because it's a whole team that does the work that we do. So I'm really proud of our team. We are, yes, the first party to have a full slate of candidates. My team has worked really hard to find these great candidates. And we've, yes, done this before the Liberals or the Conservatives, so I'll take a little bit of pride in that my team is so amazing that they were able to make that happen. And whatever happens in the future, we don't know with respect to what will come up in terms of candidates. I can just guarantee you I will make the right decision for our country and for our party when it comes to any matters that arise.
Thank you. Next question, Janice McGregor, CBC.
Appreciating the concerns that have been expressed so articulately in this cafe today. But it strikes me that these are issues that perhaps belong more in a provincial or a municipal election campaign, just jurisdictionally. Why are you trying to take what are ultimately kind of like provincial accountability issues and turn them into a federal ballot question?
Because the matter of the crisis that we're in is a national crisis. Like wherever you go in this country, people can't afford homes, and it's getting worse and worse. It's not getting better. Rents are going up. It seems impossible to buy a home. We heard from some young people who thought, maybe I've saved up a bit, maybe I'll be able to buy a home. And they're like, it's not in the books for me. I don't see it ever being in the books for me. I want to change that. And I really believe this, that a leader is not someone who looks for excuses. I could look for excuses all day and say, oh, it's not my jurisdiction. It's not something I can do something about. I could look for an excuse all day long. I think a leader is not someone who looks for excuses. It's someone who looks for solutions. And yeah, there's lots of solutions. We can absolutely find ways to protect people at the federal level. And one example that I gave, and I mean it, is that if we're investing, and no one doubts that the federal government can invest in housing, we've done that before. Investing in housing is important. Well, why would we invest in building homes that are affordable if then in a couple of years those homes are no longer affordable? That would be a bad investment. I think Canadians would say that would be a bad investment. So we're going to say we're going to make those investments, yes, but let's require that if we build a home that's affordable, it stays affordable. And the only way that happens is by putting in place better protections for renters. That means ending fixed-term leases. That means rent control. So if a jurisdiction, if a province or a municipality doesn't have those laws in place, then no, we're not going to spend money there. But if they want to have federal funding to build homes that we all know every community needs, then put in place laws that protect the people that are renting those homes.
This weekend, I think the full ramifications of the automotive sector tariffs are starting to kick in a lot of places. I'm just wondering, there have been a lot of takes about whether Canada's doing enough in terms of counter tariffs and countermeasures across levels of government, whether it needs to do more, whether it's doing too much, and that costs Canadians who have to purchase those imported goods. What's the NDP's take? Like, have we hit kind of Goldilocks equilibrium where it's just right, or would you want to see more retaliation, less? What?
On the retaliation front, I think there's been a broad consensus around the fact that we're being hit in a war that we did not want, we did not choose. It's illegal, it's unprovoked, and we got to fight back. Canadians are proudly putting their elbows up. They're saying we're going to defend our country, we're going to fight back. And I think that's the right thing to do. Where I differ, where I disagree with the approach is, from the other leaders, I'm not hearing a focus on people. Because in this difficult time, what does it actually mean that we've got this trade war? It means that people are now living more uncertain lives. It means that people are worried that life is going to get even harder. People are worried that they might lose their jobs. There might not be work for them, that they're already stretched so thin that costs might go up, and it means that they're going to be suffering. And so the difference that I present compared to Liberals and Conservatives, compared to Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre, we've been talking about solutions that make life better for people in all of this uncertainty. So the idea of protecting renters is to say, well, in the face of this storm and all of this uncertainty, it would make matters even worse if you don't even have a secure home. So let's secure people's homes by giving them more protections. We've talked about employment insurance. If workers right now lose their job, the way employment insurance works is There's a cap on how much you can claim. So if you earn, the maximum is about 60,000, and you get about half of that back. Well, the way things are right now, if you had to live off of half of your income, no one could do that. People are spending their entire income on their rent, their bills, and their groceries. So how would someone get by on half of their income? That might have worked like 30 or 40 years ago when people were able to save up and costs weren't as high. But nowadays, it's not going to work. So we want to see EI improved to cover workers, their rent, their groceries, their bills. We need to see a higher EI. We're talking about building Canada. Let's build up our country. We need to build infrastructure here. Let's use Canadian material, Canadian steel, Canadian lumber, Canadian aluminum. Let's build a more resilient economy by building up Canada. So that's our offer that's different. We're really focused on how we respond to the threat of Donald Trump and the impact on workers by protecting people. And that's really what we're offering to Canadians.
Thank you. Next question, Rachel Ayello, CTV.
Good morning. Nanos's latest numbers out this morning showed that the NDP have fallen to 8% support. I know you say you're getting questions in every election about the polls, but you are now at a new numeric low. Should we expect your campaign to pivot to triage mode next week?
Again, we saw in the Ontario election that just happened a couple months ago, they literally predicted, the same aggregate said that the New Democratic Party would not have party status. They literally formed the official opposition. So I'm not worried about that. What I'm focused on in this campaign is the choice that people have. People are rejecting the message of Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, saying, you know what, the cuts that he's proposing, not good for our country, not good for my family, not good for me. That's a no for me. And now people are starting to look at Mark Carney and saying, well, he's also talking about cuts. And he's someone that's not going to protect me and my family against the exploitation I'm experiencing as a renter. He's not someone who's going to stand up for me. If you're worried about that, send a New Democrat to fight for you. Vote for Lisa Roberts here in Halifax, and you'll have someone that's going to be on your side.
But respectfully, aren't you risking the future of your party by taking this head down, steady as she goes approach and not trying to change things up?
We are focused on people, and this campaign matters. This campaign is very important. So we're going to use every day of this campaign to give people a real choice. I don't want people to think, and I'm sure Liberals and Conservatives would love for you to think, that you have no other choice in this election. They would love for you to have no one out there pointing out that Mark Carney is someone that profited off of the housing crisis. I'm sure he would love for us to not be here to say that. I'm sure that Pierre Poilievre would love for us to not point out that his plan to cut people to services at a time of potential recession and economic disaster is a horrible plan. But we're not going anywhere. We're never going to give up fighting for people.
Thank you. Now, David Turton, CBC.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Singh. I'm just wondering if you would respond to some controversy that's happening with the candidate for the Conservatives in North Island, Powell River, Aaron Gunn. He made posts on X between 2019 and 2021 that seemingly denied the impact of residential schools on Indigenous peoples. What's your take on those comments, and what's your take on the Conservative leader who seems to be standing by his candidate?
Those comments are heinous, they're hurtful, and they're frankly clearly wrong. Aaron Gunn has made comments that go to diminishing the impact of residential schools, which we know were direct a genocide on the Indigenous people. They were shameful, they were harmful, they were hurtful, and the Canadian government was complicit in this. And the least we can do is acknowledge the harm suffered. That's a bare minimum to say, yeah, they were horrible. We need to do a lot more to walk the path of reconciliation. We need to actually lift up Indigenous people and walk as partners and allies by ensuring there's clean drinking water, adequate housing, access to healthcare, access to education. There's lots that we need to do. But at a minimum, people should expect that we acknowledge the harm that they suffered. And what Aaron Gunn is doing is diminishing that, and that is absolutely wrong. And the fact that Pierre Poilievre is standing beside a candidate is also wrong. In fact, there's been a number of local mayors and councillors in BC, large organizations that represent Indigenous people have come out and said that this is wrong, that he should drop the candidate. So my message to Pierre Poilievre is, what you're doing is wrong. Drop Aaron Gunn as a candidate. Oui, donc les propos de ce candidat Aaron
The
Gunn
comments made by this candidate, Aaron Gunn, are hateful, and he is wrong. He's trying to diminish the effects of residential schools, and it's clear that the impact was horrible. This was a genocide of the Indigenous peoples. So what Pierre Poilievre must do is reject that candidate. But that is not only my idea. A letter was written by community leaders and municipal leaders and mayors and so on. And there are also a number of organizations representing the Indigenous communities that are also saying that he must reject that candidate. So my message to Pierre Poilievre is to do the right thing and remove that candidate.
And just a second question about the announcement of the day on rent control. Your backgrounder says that you will be targeting homes that are built on federally regulated land, but most people in this room who are renters obviously don't live on federally regulated land. And of course, they live on land that's controlled by the provinces, and rent control typically in most places is controlled by the provinces. So maybe help me understand how you can make a promise that the NDP is going to bring in rent control when it's more or less out of your control. Yeah.
There's a couple of things going on. We've had a number of announcements on housing. And so one of our announcements on housing was that we would use federal land, which is in every province, every municipality, there's federal land, that we would keep that land owned by the public and that we would build 100% affordable homes on that land. In contrast to the other parties who both talk about selling off that land and selling it to the highest bidder to build mostly unaffordable homes. I think that's a bad plan. Our plan is to keep that land public, own it by the people, and to build affordable homes on that land. That's separate from today's announcement, which is about whenever we make investments in communities, there's many different funds that we have, the Housing Accelerator Fund, other affordability housing investments that we make, that anytime there's an investment made in a province or a municipality, we are going to require that it be tied to laws being in place that protect the renters. So if investments are going to be made in Halifax, for example, the requirement will be, if you want federal money to build a home, you have to pass laws, municipally and federally, that actually protect renters. We want to see laws that put in place real rent control, laws that end fixed-term leases, laws that end rent eviction and dem-eviction. Other municipalities have passed laws that ban rent evictions. We want to see those laws passed in a municipality if they want federal funds. Other provinces have rent control in place. Well, we want to see true rent control with fixed-term leases removed if you want federal funds. So it's a condition of funding. When we spend money, we absolutely can have conditions in place. So we're saying we're going to invest in homes, but there's got to be laws in place to ensure that our investments are good investments. If we build and invest in a community, whether it's federal land or not, if we just invest in a community, we want to make sure that those investments continue to benefit people, and that to do that, we need laws that protect renters.
Thank you. Now, Mara Forrest, Canadian Press.
Yeah, thank you. We're 2 weeks into the campaign now, and I wonder if it seems unrealistic at this point that we will see an NDP government at the end of this campaign. Would you be willing to say at this point that Canadians should elect a minority Liberal or Conservative government if it's not going to be an NDP government?
Well, I can tell you from my lived experience, from what I've seen. We were in a minority government, and I can tell you that just 25 New Democrats were able to bring in dental care that has helped millions of Canadians. Literally millions of people have been able to look after their teeth because we fought to bring that in, with just 25 of us. 25 of us brought in pharmacare, and now 3 provinces are going to have free birth control and diabetes medication and devices because we fought for it. Just 25 of us. So imagine what would happen if you elected more of us, sent more of us to Ottawa. If you sent more of us to Ottawa, we could fight for you even more. If you sent me as your prime minister, I would be honored to serve. People would choose the outcome of this election. I'm asking people to consider, who do you want in Ottawa fighting for you? Who do you want standing up to say, you know what, no, I'm not going to let corporate landlords rip you off? Who do you want in Ottawa to say, you know what, I want us to have more affordable groceries. I'm going to put in a price cap on food essentials. Who do you want in Ottawa fighting for you and your family, for fighting for the things that you hold dear? That's a New Democrat. And so send Lisa Roberts if you live here in Halifax. Wherever you live, send a New Democrat that's going to fight for you.
And I wonder if we could hear Ms. Roberts on just how you've seen the housing situation change in Halifax in the last few years.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you. I was the MLA and the NDP provincial housing critic the first time that someone slept in a tent visibly in my constituency. And at that time, I had folks calling my office, my MLA office, and saying, you have to do something. You have to intervene on this person's behalf. And they knew that person's name so that they would be well sheltered and taken care of. And so it's been really quite dramatic over the past 8 years how prevalent, visible, persistent homelessness has become, and really how frustrating it is. Again, as a former MLA, as a former housing critic for the Nova Scotia NDP caucus, there's no satisfaction in saying, we told you so. But literally in Province House in Nova Scotia, I told them so. Like, I asked questions to the Premier as we were seeing older, deeply, relatively affordable buildings being bought up and the entire buildings being renovicted and repositioned at much higher rents. So yeah, I'm super motivated to win this seat in Halifax because there is so much work that we need to do. There are solutions that we can. There are solutions from around the world that we can learn from and adopt, and people really need someone fighting for them to have the security of home so that they can commit to their communities and commit to their lives.
Thank you.
All right, you were
Last
listening
question.
to a news conference with NDP leader Jagmeet Singh speaking there in Halifax, talking about a party plan for a national rent control plan to protect tenants. Alexander Silberman has been listening in on this from Ottawa. Alexander, a lot of things that was mentioned there, protecting tenants, trying to make things more affordable, ending fixed-term leases as well. What stood out for you?
Well, a couple of takeaways, Marianne. First of all, the NDP is wading a bit into provincial jurisdiction with this policy announcement. I heard a question there from our colleague Janice McGregor putting that to Singh, and he says, well, jurisdiction for him is an excuse not to do something, and he emphasized that the federal government has a role to play when it comes to housing, when it comes to making rentals more affordable. But housing, of course, and regulations around rentals, that's something that typically falls to the provinces and to the municipalities as well. I'd also like to point out that this idea of creating a national renters' bill of rights, this is something that came up in the last federal budget. The previous Liberal government had talked about doing this. They had brought out that idea, but never got around to it before the end of their time in government this past fall. So this idea from the NDP is very much in line with a lot of the announcements we've heard so far from the party. They've talked a lot about the concerns of renters, concerns about access to affordable housing throughout the campaign, making many announcements with renters in different parts of the country. So housing, clearly a key priority for them. We heard today Singh say in that announcement he will bring in national rent control, talking about tying restrictions on housing to funding to the provinces, and bring in other policies like banning fixed-term leases. He also says that he will ban what he describes as collusion by corporate landlords. Now, the cost of housing, as we heard from the local candidate in that riding for the NDP, and rentals in particular, definitely top of mind for a lot of voters in Halifax. It's a city that's grappled with homelessness, a widespread visible homelessness in the past few years, a number of tent encampments, a big issue there. But there's still questions on what this would mean for a place like Nova Scotia, because Nova Scotia does currently have provincial rent control. So there's still a lot of questions, Marianne, around how this policy proposal from the NDP might work and what difference it could make.
And speaking of questions, he was asked a lot of questions, not necessarily about the rental announcement today, but also on the retaliatory tariffs, saying that he would encourage Canadians to fight back, but with the focus on the people, also saying he's not paying attention to the polls. Let's talk about Halifax, though. Why do you think the NDP is focused on Halifax today?
Well, this riding, which is the city center of Halifax, really the core of the city, it's one that the NDP has set their sights on. That's because it's one of their most realistic chances at winning a seat in Atlantic Canada, a region of the country where the NDP did not hold any seats heading into this election. But it's still going to be a tough battle for them on the ground. We look at past results, and Halifax is historically an NDP riding. So the party hopes they can round up that support they've had in the past. They previously held the seat under former NDP leader Alexa McDonough. So the NDP's focus this weekend, along with a previous stop in St. John's East, all about trying to generate support in areas where they found success in the past.
CBC's Alexander Silberman in Ottawa. Thanks so much. And taking a look at Parliament Hill this hour, it is day 15 of federal election campaigning. Our coverage continues with Rosemary Barton Live. And just a reminder that starting tomorrow, CBC News Network will be free to watch for the entire remainder of the election campaign. You can watch Canada's #1 news network through your cable provider on CBC Gem, CBCNews.ca, and on the CBC News app.